Well, the Hartzell family is quite tired this morning after our big event last night. For many of you who have been with us for the last couple of weeks, our family has this tradition of celebrating Bilbo Baggins' birthday, which is usually in September, but because we simply and recently moved here about 6-7 weeks ago, we planned it for yesterday, and it's an annual event. The one that we were a part of back in Chicago was just held a few weeks ago and had 600 people at it. And so, but this is the first one here. So we started for the first time, and a lot of energy went into the weeks following up, leading up to it. Lori made this amazing smog dragon creation that was part of the scenes, and Aliana designed and created this incredible cake that is now sitting in the lobby, partially eaten. We didn't eat it all last night, but we also wanted you all to see and experience the incredible art and the rehearsing of scenes that went into it. But as you know, as I mentioned as we began, that it rained pretty hard last night. And so last night, every member of my family, I think, were trying to manage a certain level of disappointment with the rain. It's like my mother sewed these incredibly beautiful pennants that you could hang up, these flags that you could hang up and string from tree to tree. We put up lanterns with lights in them. I mean, it was magical until the downpour. And then we all crowded inside a clubhouse to try to eat this incredible feast that had been prepared, all sort of wondering, is this really a party? And then my kids were trying to figure out, do we do this, all the scenes that had been prepared to act out in the forest walk, which is supposed to happen at night with lanterns and be all creepy and magical, do we do it inside the clubhouse? That's not going to be very fun. And so every kid was like, this is terrible. And I wanted to say to the folks, I did say to one of the guests that had come, I'm so sorry for the rain. And they said, we never apologize for rain in San Diego. We never apologize for rain. And so that helped me with this sermon topic this morning, which is on gratitude. And it's like, can I be grateful in the midst of disappointment? Can I be thankful for something that has ruined our party? And it's supposed to be an event where we invite folks from the community and we build relationships and we help folks learn about our church community and what it means to be a part of this incredible church family that we've recently become a part of. So in our sermon series on how the unworthy become worthy, we get to look at this passage in Luke where the 10 lepers were miraculously healed by Jesus. Now, for me, sorry, I went the wrong way. What we're talking about in this series is how folks of a certain nature, that would be all of us, scoundrelly, each of my kids identify well with the scoundrel word, how we can be transformed, how we can be changed into the people of God, who God made us to be. So for me, when everything is going my way and the sun is shining at a Bilbo Baggins party and all is well with my family, I feel like I can be incredibly gracious and grateful with people when everything's going well. I can be patient with my kids when everything's going well. When I've had a full night's sleep and a delicious tall cup of coffee, I feel like I have unlimited patience with my children. I can be patient even towards those that are rude and mean towards me, jerks, impatient jerks that honk at me in traffic for no reason. I slowly approached a crosswalk recently in my car, and there was a woman in it, and I was clearly not going to run her over. Coming to a slow stop, she stopped in the crosswalk, turned to me, and yelled, "No, you don't." She waved at me, giving me a California howdy. That's where you wave, but you forget 4 of your fingers. And I smiled, and I waved back at her using all of my fingers. And she just kept walking, but scowling. I thought, man, she must be having a bad day. I can scroll on by these inflammatory and crazy posts on social media without commenting when I've had a great night's sleep. I can be patient with Michael, my 7-year-old, and his high energy morning antics. When he was 5, he liked to oink a lot. like a pig. He believed maybe perhaps he was a pig, but it was all he would say. For days, it was all he would say. What would you like for breakfast? Oink, oink. Would you like a biscuit? Oink, oink. Or cereal? Oink, oink. And it required a tremendous amount of patience to get him breakfast when all of his answers to all of your practical questions were oink, oink, with that silly grin on his face, sort of maniacally laughing at you. When things are going well in my life, I can be gracious and grateful to others pretty easily. But what about when the things in my life aren't going very well? I'm having a bad day. I didn't sleep very well. The coffee grounds got into the coffee and messes everything up. How well can I be grateful when I'm sad or in physical pain, like having a badly bruised and sprained ankle, just hypothetically? Gross. How gracious can I be when I have a head-splitting headache? Or I didn't sleep well? Or my worries about the kids or the finances or car trouble start to build up and things just keep going wrong? Expressing gratitude in every season, how do we even do that? I feel like there are these two kinds of scenarios that I've just described for us to consider. Our gospel passage illustrates one kind of scenario, the gift scenario, where we're receiving gift upon gifts from God, like the answer to our prayers, or miracles happen, or God's provision, where what we need is provided for us. And the second scenario is expressing gratitude during seasons of suffering or seasons of want. Prayers aren't being answered. We prayed a lot for there not to be rain last night. And in the middle of the downpour, I was like, Lord. Paul says he experienced both, seasons of want, seasons of plenty. And he learned how to be grateful in those seasons. How do we learn to give thanks during seasons of abundance or seasons of need? When we're experiencing gifts or when we're experiencing grief? Let's start with seasons of abundance. So let's look at our gospel passage of the 10 lepers. I'll put it up as soon as the screens are up. But that passage that we read of the 10 lepers in Luke, they lived with incredible deprivations. The lepers in society in the first century were the absolute and utter outcasts. I mean, it was worse than COVID. If you came in contact with them, you were likely to contract the bacteria that causes leprosy, that kills the nerves in your body so that parts of your body start to flake off and you end up with nerve death. And it's irreversible, but it's caused by a bacteria. They didn't understand how you got it. They just saw the trend that people in contact with lepers got leprosy, and it destroyed everything in your life. It destroyed your family, your community. You couldn't maintain a job. So financially, relationally, socially, you were completely poor in every way. They lived in hunger, begging for food at the bottom of the social pyramid, starved for affection or love or community. They know what it's like to live in need, to have their needs to go unmet. And one day, for these 10, all of that comes to a sudden and immediate end. Crying out to the miracle worker, Jesus himself, who's walking by, they were given a command to go present themselves to the priest, which is something that you would tell people to do if they had received a healing miracle. That was the instruction. So they were instructed to go to the priest and present themselves before they had received any kind of healing or miracle. I don't know what went through their minds, but they simply went. And as they went, they experienced the transformation of their body. They began to experience the sensation of their fingertips or their toes, whatever parts they couldn't feel, they could suddenly feel. And one man of the 10 turns around and goes back to find Jesus, chasing him down so that he can fall on his knees and give thanks to Jesus for the incredible gift that God had just given in the physical healing that he had received. He gives thanks. He shows gratitude. He bears witness to the grace of God in his life. And he seems quite loud about it. He is vocal. He gives testimony. And Jesus responds in this affirming way. He blesses the man. But he makes this surprising statement at the end. He says, your faith has saved you, or your faith has healed you. That word in that verse, saved, is the word sozo in Greek, which is translated either saved or healed. Saved or healed. Your faith has saved you. Your faith has healed you. Now, there are a number of ways these lepers could have responded. Here's the verse itself. That final verse at the bottom, rise and go, your faith has made you well. Sozo. They could have muttered, as the lepers were being healed and they experienced it in their body, they could have muttered, finally, and gone on to be bitter against God for all the years that they've lost, to be bitter at others for the way that they were treated while they had leprosy, for the loss of the years that they had suffered, the actual physical suffering they had endured. We can miss giving thanks in response to the gifts of grace that God gives us. We can fail to recognize them as gifts and simply receive them as more burden. And we can grow bitter in response to the gifts that God gives. Have any of you read the Narnia Chronicles written by C.S. Lewis? Raise your hand if you're familiar with these books. Okay, the last book in the series is called The Last Battle. And of course, Aslan is the lion who represents Christ. And it's an incredible story of people coming in contact with the Christ character and being changed in marvelous ways. In the last battle, they all kind of make their way to Aslan's country, which is the symbol in Lewis's mythology of heaven, of coming home to heaven. And there are these dwarves that come into Aslan's country. And I don't know if you remember the circle of dwarves that are in Aslan's country, and the children are looking in on them, wondering why they're so miserable in Aslan's country, in heaven. Why are they so miserable? And these selfish, bitter dwarves, as they make their way in to heaven, they cannot see that they're in the sunshine. So they talk about how it's so dark in here. And the children ask Aslan, the Christ character, will you help them? And he causes a great feast to appear before them. But the dwarves can't see the feast. And so they start to grab what's in front of them to eat it and describing it as the kind of slop you would find in a pig barn or a pigsty. Can't believe I'm eating this moldy old cabbage. But it's actually a feast. And so Lewis sort of describes this human capacity that we have to be surrounded by gift, but to be unable to see it or receive it. And we can be that way. Is that us, friends? Do we recognize and give thanks for the gifts that God gives? That's the season of plenty, the season of gift. But the second season that we struggle to give thanks in are the seasons of need and suffering. Paul experienced many seasons like this in his travels to share the gospel throughout the book of Acts and to start new churches. He's arrested, he's flogged, he's stoned to death, but somehow he walks away. He's starved, he's shipwrecked, he's imprisoned, beaten, and eventually he's killed in the city of Rome, beheaded, for his commitment to sharing the gospel with every person. He says in his letters that he's learned in whatever situation to be content. He writes this, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. In any and every circumstance, I have learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. How do we cry out to God and give thanks when we're suffering? There's this book that really affected me that I read recently, Anne Voskamp. Have you read this author? She wrote the book 10,000 Gifts. Anybody? So most of this is from her book, but if you haven't read it, then you'll think that I'm marvelous. So in 2010, she writes this book, 1,000 Gifts, and her story starts out as this incredible tragedy. When she was 4 years old, her younger sister, aged 2, was killed in their driveway by a delivery truck. And that moment shaped the rest of her life. Her parents could not believe in a good God that allows toddlers to get killed. Her parents eventually, in their grief, divorced one another. And her mother ended up in an institution with a mental illness, holding on to the baby blanket of the toddler. The shadow of her baby sister's death blanketed everything. She says that she believed the serpent's lie, that God is not good, that God withholds from his children, that God does not genuinely fully love us, and then doubting his goodness, discontented with what he has given, we desire more. Anne writes this, from all our beginnings, we keep reliving the garden story. Satan, he wanted more power, more glory. Ultimately, in his essence, Satan is an ingrate, and he sinks his venom into the heart of Eden. Satan's sin becomes the first sin of all humanity, the sin of ingratitude. Adam and Eve are simply painfully ungrateful for what God gave. Our fall was, has always been, and always will be that we are not satisfied in God and what he gives. We hunger for something more. It's a beautiful quote. And I when I first read it, I thought, man, she really nailed something. But she's not the first person to think that the original sin was the sin of ingratitude. Her idea actually comes from St. Irenaeus, church father, 2nd century. He writes that the original sin is ingratitude. So there's got to be some truth to this reality. It's the feeling that this, whatever this is in your life, is not enough. It's not good enough. It surely must be what the apostles felt on early Easter morning. Peter, the women at the tomb, before they discovered that Jesus was resurrected, after all that they'd been through, to have it all end with the terrible events of Good Friday and the emptiness of Saturday. Where is God? They had to be asking. From the moment they each had met Jesus and been immersed in the true way of the kingdom of God, the deliverances from evil that they had all seen and experienced, the healing miracles, how patient and gracious Jesus was, and the love that he gave that fills a person up and says you're meant for so much more. How could they not severely hunger for more than their weekend had revealed up to that moment? How can we not hunger for more in our own lives? It's ultimately that question, is this all there is? That I was asking at the age of 14 when somebody then responded by sharing the gospel with me and I became a Christian. I wanted to know, is this all there is? Because this is not awesome. What I was experiencing in my life, what it's like to live without God. This is not that great. People talk about how great life is, but this is not that great. That emptiness, that can lead a person to ask for more. And Jesus stands ready to give more. But if we can't receive it with gratitude, then we are ingrates. And we commit that particular sin that keeps us from tasting the goodness of God. This is when Anne Voskamp discovers the transforming power of Eucharisteo. That's the word that gives us Eucharist. And it's translated from the Greek into the words to give thanks, giving thanks, Eucharisteo. So the Eucharist is this act of giving thanks. One night, Anne has this nightmare that whispers of cancer and death that startles her awake with panic and fear. And she feels dread in her body. As she ponders the things that she might never see in her life because cancer runs in her family, she wonders what she would do if she were given 12 hours left to live. What would you do if the doctor said to you, you have 12 hours left, half a day? You won't even make it to the end of this day. What would you do with your final 12 hours of life? I saw someone post on Facebook that if they were given 12 hours left, that's about how much time you need to watch all the Star Wars movies. Is that what you would do? Lord of the Rings marathon? I don't know how that's how I would spend the last 12 hours of my life. Anne Voskamp says in her book that she looked at what Jesus did, assuming Jesus knew he had 12 hours left. What did Jesus do? What did he count most important? And he took bread, and he gave thanks, and he broke it, and he gave it to them. Luke 22:19. He gave thanks comes from the word Eucharisteo. The root to Eucharisteo is charis, which means grace, charis. But the word charis still holds its derivative, chara, which means joy. So joy is at the very base of this word that gives us Eucharisteo. Joy is the goal of the fullest life. But where can someone find this holy grail of joy? She sees that joy is found embedded in the word Eucharisteo, in the table of thanksgiving. Is the height of one's chara, joy, dependent on the depths of one's Eucharisteo, thanks? She concludes that as long as thanks is possible, then joy is always possible. The holy grail of joy is not in some exotic location or some emotional mountain peak experience. It could be here in the messy, piercing ache of now. Grace, thanksgiving, joy are all bound up in Eucharisteo, giving thanks. St. Augustine wrote in the 5th century this quote, "The greatest thing is to give thanks for everything. He who has learned this knows what it means to live. He has penetrated the whole mystery of life, giving thanks for everything." Friends, this is why the Eucharist, our ceremony of the Lord's Supper every Sunday, is the central symbol of Christianity. Whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup are the words in Scripture that Jesus says, like every day, like whenever we eat. When Jesus fed the 5,000, he took the bread and gave thanks. Eucharisteo precedes the miracle of multiplication. Standing outside Lazarus' tomb, Jesus prays out loud, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me." Eucharisteo raises the dead. On the night that he was betrayed, Jesus offers thanksgiving for even that which will break him and crush him and wound him, but yield a bounty of joy. Can we give thanks even in our messes and our failures and in our pain? Do we really want to take up the word Eucharisteo and try to live it out? Maybe you already take up the word every Sunday when you put the bread in your mouth in a very tangible physical act. Aren't you enacting your thanksgiving for his pain? In our story this morning of the 10 lepers who were healed, but only one returns to give thanks, what does Jesus say to that man? It's right up on the screen. Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he says, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." Why does he say your faith has made you well? Hadn't Jesus already completely healed him from leprosy? Or is there a deeper meaning in this final verse? Another version says your faith has saved you. So when was he saved? When was he made whole? I believe that the implication from this passage is that he was saved when he returned and gave thanks. That gratitude in this case precedes wholeness, precedes salvation. The psalmist writes in Psalm 50, "He who sacrifices thank offerings honors me and prepares the way so that I may show him the salvation of God." Once her discovery was made, Anne Voskamp put pen to paper and began to record the moments of Eucharisteo throughout her day. She begins shyly. Number 1, morning shadows across the old floors. Number 2, jam piled high on the toast. That would be my children. Number 3, cry of the blue jay from high in the spruce. Number 4, leafy life scent of the florist shop. And thus she titles her book 1,000 Gifts. It's the simple but difficult task of seeing gift, grace, charis, in each moment and pausing to dignify the gift by writing it down. writing a small phrase to dignify it, and that the door out of her tragedy and loss and emptiness opened before her. In giving thanks, she found delight, joy, kara, where before she had only seen incompleteness, unfulfilled desires, holes in the fabric of the world. She experienced the transforming power of Eucharisteo. And it led her into miracles, into joy, into being made whole, into resurrection. How well do you express your gratitude when you are empty or grieving or worried or in pain or exhausted? I do believe that when God carries you through a season of suffering, that is where you are actually stretched and grown the most in your capacity to display gratitude. It can be easy to give gratitude in those seasons of great bounty, answered prayers. But it's the seasons of suffering that actually stretch us in our capacity. I remember many months ago when we discovered that our kids, bunnies, gave birth to 14 baby bunnies. My kids were into breeding bunnies and selling the babies, and of course there's a lot of joy in our family on the day that the babies were born. 14 was a lot, though. It's a lot of baby bunnies. And that morning we rejoiced and we celebrated. The bunnies were owned by Stephen. He's now 10, but at the time, he was, I want to say he was 7 years old at the time that this happened. And we rejoiced with him, and Stephen, the proud owner, he was so happy and he was beaming. But by the next morning, tragedy had struck. A predator had gotten in to the secure area somehow and destroyed 10 of the 14 baby bunnies, leaving only 4 alive. My children were devastated and dismayed. The scene looked like something from a horror film. And with tears in his eyes, Stephen, who is holding the 4 remaining baby bunnies, says to me, "I'm thankful that these 4 are still alive." My sweet boy, may we all be strengthened and stretched in our capacities to express gratitude by the very gift of grace that Christ gives to us. As leaders in the church, we have to help one another to take up gratitude, to take up thanksgiving, Eucharisteo, for all the unmet needs and the sufferings that we see in our church family and in the community around us. We have to learn Eucharisteo. So what are you thanking God for this morning? I would encourage you to put pen to paper to write out, what are you giving thanks for? To those who feel as if we are unworthy, as if we might be at times ingrates, this is the process of transformation. Gratitude precedes healing transformation.